A diplomat arrived with a human bodyguard. The crystalline spires of Zephyria Prime gleamed under the dual suns as Ambassador Vex Thul adjusted his ceremonial robes one final time. The Kalari diplomat's 6 eyes swept across the landing platform where representatives from 12 different species had gathered. They were here for what many considered a futile exercise: peace negotiations between the Hegemony Alliance and the Terran Coalition after 3 devastating years of interstellar warfare. The war had begun over mining rights in the Outer Rim, but had escalated into something far more sinister. The Hegemony, led by the militaristic Drakmori Empire, viewed humans as aggressive upstarts who needed to be contained or eliminated. Every attempt at diplomacy had failed, usually ending in bloodshed within hours of the first meeting. "The human delegation approaches," announced Counselor Jiktar, his reptilian features betraying nervous energy. The assembled diplomats turned their various optical organs toward the sky, where a sleek Terran vessel descended through the atmosphere with surprising grace. What landed was not the massive warship they expected, but a modest diplomatic courier. As the airlock hissed open, Ambassador Vex Thul prepared himself for the typical human delegation, perhaps 6 or 7 individuals, all armed to their various teeth, speaking in loud voices and making unreasonable demands. Instead, 2 figures emerged from the ship. The first was clearly the human diplomat, a woman of average height wearing simple blue robes that marked her as a member of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. She walked with measured steps, her dark hair pulled back in a practical style, carrying only a small briefcase. Nothing about her suggested the warrior culture that had been tearing through hegemony fleets for 3 years. Behind her walked what could only be described as death-given form. The human bodyguard stood nearly 7 feet tall, his frame filling out a black tactical suit that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most alien species had heard descriptions of human soldiers, but seeing one in person was an entirely different experience. Even at rest, every line of his body suggested coiled violence waiting to be unleashed. His pale eyes moved constantly, cataloging threats and calculating angles of attack with mechanical precision. But it was not just his physical presence that sent ripples of unease through the gathered diplomats. There was something else, an aura of barely contained lethality that made even the predatory Drakmori representatives take involuntary steps backward. "I am Ambassador Sarah Chen," the human woman announced in perfectly accented Galactic Standard, her voice carrying clearly across the platform. "I come seeking an end to this conflict that has cost all our people so dearly." General Korath, the Drakmori military governor overseeing the talks, stepped forward with what passed for a diplomatic smile among his species. His black scales gleamed as he gestured with one clawed hand toward the human bodyguard. "And who is this intimidating companion you have brought to our peace talks, Ambassador?" Ambassador Chen glanced back at her protector with something that might have been affection. "This is Sergeant Marcus Kane, formerly of the Terran Special Operations Division. He volunteered to ensure my safety during these negotiations." "Volunteered?" General Korath's voice carried a hint of mockery. How touching. "Tell me, Sergeant, how many hegemony soldiers have you killed during this war?" The human bodyguard's expression never changed as he met the general's gaze directly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational. "I stopped counting at 300, sir. Would you like me to resume keeping track?" The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Several of the smaller species' representatives began edging away from the humans, while the Drakmori military escorts reached for their weapons before thinking better of it. Ambassador Vex Thul cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should proceed to the conference chamber. We have much to discuss." As the group began moving toward the gleaming diplomatic complex, whispered conversations erupted among the alien delegates. None of them had expected the humans to send such a small delegation, and the presence of the obviously lethal bodyguard raised questions about Terran intentions. The conference chamber was a marvel of neutral architecture, designed to accommodate the physiological needs of all known spacefaring species. Atmospheric zones provided appropriate breathing mixtures, while variable gravity fields ensured everyone could participate comfortably. The central table was a masterwork of diplomatic furniture, with each position carefully calculated to avoid giving any species a psychological advantage. Ambassador Chen took her assigned seat with grace, while Sergeant Kane positioned himself precisely 3 meters behind her chair, close enough to intervene instantly, far enough away to avoid appearing threatening to the other delegates. "Before we begin," General Korath announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I must address the elephant in the room, as you humans say. This war began because your species refuses to acknowledge the natural order of galactic civilization. The strong rule, the weak serve. This has been the way for millennia." "With respect, General," Ambassador Chen replied calmly, "that attitude is precisely why this war started. Humanity joined the galactic community hoping for cooperation and mutual benefit, not subjugation. And look where that hope has led," snarled Commander Vexakul, a Drak Mori naval officer whose scarred carapace spoke of many battles. 3 years of death and destruction. Entire star systems reduced to rubble. Your species has proven itself nothing but a plague upon the galaxy. The human ambassador's composure never wavered, but those with sensitive hearing caught the subtle shift in Sergeant Kane's breathing pattern. His pale eyes had locked onto Commander Vexakul with the intensity of a targeting computer. "The Terran Coalition has matched your forces engagement for engagement," Ambassador Chen stated factually. "If we are a plague, what does that make the hegemony forces we have defeated?" "Lucky," General Korath replied with a harsh laugh. "You have achieved temporary victories through savage tactics and reckless disregard for civilized warfare. But your luck is running out, human. Our reinforcements grow stronger each day, while your primitive industrial base cannot hope to match the combined might of 12 advanced civilizations." This was when Sergeant Kane spoke for the second time since arriving. 13. The single word fell into the chamber like a stone into still water, creating ripples of confusion. "I beg your pardon?" General Korath's head tilted in the Drak Mori expression of puzzlement. 13 civilizations, the human bodyguard repeated, his voice still conversational but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "You said 12, but the Zealith Syndicate joined the hegemony 2 days ago. Their fleet is currently massing in the Proxima sector." The silence that followed was profound. Ambassador Vexthul felt his secondary heart skip a beat. The Zealith Syndicate's membership in the hegemony was classified information, known only to the highest levels of command. How could a human soldier possibly... "You also failed to mention the Korthak battle stations being moved into position around Terra," Sergeant Kane continued, his pale eyes never leaving General Korath's face. 47 mobile platforms, each mounting Class 5 graviton cannons. Quite impressive, really. General Korath's black scales began changing color, cycling through deep purples and reds, a sign of extreme stress among his species. "How do you—" "The same way I know about the assassination teams currently en route to 7 major Terran colonies," Kane interrupted gently. "The same way I know that this entire negotiation is a stalling tactic designed to keep our fleets occupied while you position your forces for a final assault." The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates began shouting in multiple languages. Weapons were drawn by nervous security details, while others demanded explanations or denials. Through it all, Ambassador Chen remained seated calmly, as if she had expected this revelation. It was Ambassador Vexthul who finally restored order, his voice carrying the authority of his species' renowned diplomatic tradition. "This is a serious accusation, Sergeant. Do you have proof of these claims? Sergeant Kane reached slowly into his tactical vest. His movements deliberately telegraphed to avoid triggering a firefight. He withdrew a small datapad and placed it gently on the conference table. Complete battle plans, encrypted communications, and timetables for the offensive. I acquired these files approximately 18 hours ago. Acquired how? Demanded General Korath, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The human bodyguard's expression never changed as he delivered his answer with the same conversational tone he had used throughout the meeting. I killed everyone at your command center on Drakmori Prime. The words hit the assembled delegates like physical blows. Several species representatives began backing toward the exits, while others sat in stunned silence trying to process what they had just heard. Impossible, General Korath whispered. Drakmori Prime is the most heavily defended world in our empire. The orbital defenses alone are very impressive, Kane acknowledged. It took me almost 6 hours to infiltrate the surface. The guard rotations were well planned, though your sensor operators need better training. Too much reliance on technology, not enough on instinct. Ambassador Chen finally spoke, her voice cutting through the rising panic like a blade. Sergeant Kane volunteered for this mission knowing it was likely suicide. The fact that he returned with this intelligence proves that the hegemony's military superiority is an illusion. This is an act of war, Commander Vexcool snarled, his hand moving toward his sidearm. Kane's response was so fast that most of the delegates missed it entirely. One moment he was standing relaxed behind Ambassador Chen's chair, the next he was across the table with the Drakmori commander pinned against the wall, a vibroblade pressed against the alien's throat. The war already started, Kane said quietly, his voice never rising above conversational level. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, to be precise. When your forces attacked our research station at Alpha Centauri without warning or provocation, when you killed 3,000 civilian scientists, including my sister. The personal revelation hit the chamber like a thunderclap. This was not just a soldier following orders. This was someone with a very personal stake in the conflict's outcome. Now, Kane continued, his blade never wavering, you have a choice to make. You can continue this war, knowing that I represent just one of approximately 50,000 humans who have lost family members to hegemony aggression, humans who have been trained in the same skills I have demonstrated today, humans who are very, very motivated to end this conflict permanently. He released Commander Vexcool and stepped back, the vibroblade disappearing into his vest as smoothly as it had appeared. Or you can choose to end this war today, before my colleagues decide to pay personal visits to every hegemony leader, military base, and strategic asset in your territory. General Korath's scales had gone pale, cycling through colors that indicated fear and confusion. You're threatening to assassinate our entire command structure? I'm offering you the courtesy of a warning, Kane replied. Something your forces failed to provide when they attacked Alpha Centauri. Ambassador Chen stood slowly, her briefcase clicking open. A diplomat arrived with a human bodyguard. The emergency session had been called within 30 minutes of Sergeant Kane's revelation. Word had spread through the hegemony command structure like wildfire. A single human operative had penetrated their most secure facility and eliminated an entire command staff without triggering so much as an alarm. The implications were staggering. Ambassador Vexthul found himself in the unusual position of mediating between species that were rapidly reconsidering their entire strategic outlook. The conference chamber had been cleared of all but essential personnel, leaving only the primary delegates and their immediate security details. The atmosphere was thick with tension and barely suppressed fear. Let me understand this correctly, said Premier Zalthus of the Catherian Republic, her crystalline features refracting the chamber's light in agitated patterns. This human-infiltrated Drakmori Prime eliminated 57 military personnel, including 3 generals, stole our most classified battle plans, and escaped without being detected until he chose to reveal himself here. General Korath's response was barely audible. The security recordings show nothing. No alarms were triggered. We only discovered the casualties after he had already departed the system. The weight of this admission settled heavily on the assembled delegates. The Drakmori were renowned throughout the galaxy for their military prowess and paranoid security measures. If their most secure installation could be compromised so easily, what did that say about the rest of the hegemony's defenses? "How is this possible?" demanded Admiral Kexril of the Tenthari Fleet Command, his tentacles writhing in distress. "Our intelligence reports indicated that human technology was decades behind our own. Their ships are crude, their weapons primitive by our standards." Sergeant Kane, who had remained silent since his dramatic revelation, finally spoke. "You're correct about our technology, Admiral. Your ships are faster, your shields stronger, your weapons more advanced. But you've made a fundamental error in your assessment." He gestured toward the data pad still sitting in the center of the table. "You assumed that superior technology equates to superior capability. You forgot to account for the human factor." "Elaborate," Admiral Kexril demanded, though his voice carried less authority than it had an hour earlier. Kane's pale eyes swept the chamber, cataloging every delegate's position and stress indicators with the automaticity of long practice. "Your species have grown comfortable. Thousands of years of technological advancement have made you reliant on machines to do what your ancestors once did themselves. You've forgotten what it means to be truly desperate." "Desperate enough to sacrifice yourself for a mission?" Ambassador Chen asked, her tone suggesting this was a planned exchange. "Desperate enough to volunteer for a one-way mission to save our species from extermination," Kane replied. "When the survival of everything you care about depends on success, you find reserves of capability you didn't know existed." The human bodyguard moved to the chamber's central display screen, his movements still carrying that predatory grace that made several delegates flinch involuntarily. "Your intelligence was correct. I shouldn't have been able to infiltrate Drakmori Prime. The orbital defenses, the patrol schedules, the sensor networks, all perfectly designed to stop conventional infiltration attempts." The screen activated at his touch, displaying a 3-dimensional map of the Drakmori homeworld. Red markers indicated defensive installations, while blue lines showed patrol routes and sensor coverage. "But I didn't use conventional methods," Kane continued. "I attached myself to the hull of a supply freighter and rode it through your outer perimeter. 68 hours in vacuum with minimal life support, no communication with my ship, and no guarantee the freighter would follow the expected flight path." Several of the alien delegates made sounds of disbelief. Extended exposure to hard vacuum was lethal to most species, requiring massive life support systems to survive even brief periods. Once inside the perimeter, I used the freighter's waste disposal system to reach the surface. Another 12 hours in an environment that should have killed me, breathing recycled air and drinking filtered water from industrial waste systems. "Madness," whispered Counselor Zhiktar. "No rational being would attempt such a thing." Kane's expression never changed. "You're absolutely right, Counselor. It was madness. But it worked because your security planners never considered that someone might be desperate enough to try it. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. If one human could accomplish this much alone, what could thousands accomplish working in coordination? "The ground infiltration took 18 hours, Kane continued, manipulating the display to show the command complex's internal structure. "Your guards were well-trained and alert, but they were watching for technological threats, stealth fields, hacking attempts, aerial insertions. They weren't prepared for someone who was willing to crawl through maintenance tunnels and waste processing systems. "You killed 57 trained soldiers," General Korath said, his voice hollow. "Some of them were veterans of a dozen campaigns." "I didn't kill them," Kane corrected quietly. "I executed a surgical strike against military targets during wartime. There's a difference." The distinction was lost on no one present. This wasn't the boasting of a warrior or the brutality of a savage. This was the clinical assessment of a professional soldier discussing mission parameters. Each elimination was performed silently and efficiently, Kane explained, his tone remaining conversational. Nerve strikes, blade work, and in 3 cases, improvised weapons created from materials found in the facility. No energy signatures, no ballistic evidence, no alerts to the central security system. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her expression grave. Sergeant Kane's mission proves a critical point that the hegemony leadership has failed to grasp. This war isn't about technology or fleet strength or economic resources. It's about will to survive. Your species decided to exterminate humanity, she continued, her voice growing harder. You attacked our civilian research stations, targeted our colonies, and declared your intention to wipe us from the galaxy. What you failed to understand is that backed into a corner, humans become extremely dangerous. Premier Zalthus's crystalline features shifted into patterns of deep concern. You're suggesting that this demonstration was intended as a deterrent? I'm stating it plainly, Ambassador Chen replied. Sergeant Kane's mission was designed to show you exactly what motivated humans are capable of achieving. He volunteered for what should have been a suicide mission because the alternative was the extinction of our species. The human diplomat activated her own datapad, and the chamber's displays changed to show personnel files. Hundreds of faces appeared, men and women of various ages, all wearing similar expressions of grim determination. These are the volunteers for Operation Longshot, Chen explained. 537 human special operations personnel who have requested assignment to deep infiltration missions targeting hegemony leadership and strategic assets. The faces continued cycling through the display, each one representing a potential Sergeant Kane. The psychological impact was devastating. Every delegate could see their own death reflected in those determined eyes. Every one of these individuals has lost family members to hegemony attacks, Chen continued. Everyone has volunteered for missions with survival rates approaching 0. Everyone has been trained to the same standards as Sergeant Kane and equipped with intelligence gathered from his reconnaissance of your facilities. Admiral Kexril's tentacles had gone rigid with fear. You're threatening systematic assassination of our entire command structure. I'm explaining the inevitable outcome if this war continues, Chen corrected. You have superior technology, larger fleets, and greater numbers. In a conventional war, you would eventually win through attrition. But this stopped being a conventional war the moment you decided to target our civilians. Kane stepped away from the display and returned to his position behind Ambassador Chen. The mission to Drakmori Prime wasn't my first infiltration, General. It was my 5th. I've already gathered intelligence on 17 major hegemony installations, including the locations and personal schedules of every member of the High Command. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chamber's environmental systems seemed to quiet as the delegates absorbed this revelation. You've been watching us, General Korath said, his voice barely above a whisper. Learning about you, Kane corrected. Your habits, your security protocols, your weaknesses, information that's been shared with every volunteer in Operation Longshot. By the time this meeting ends, those operatives will either be standing down or beginning their final infiltrations. Ambassador Vexthul felt his diplomatic training warring with basic survival instinct. In 4 decades of interstellar negotiations, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The humans weren't bluffing or posturing. They were presenting a simple equation with binary outcomes. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Ambassador Chen opened her briefcase and withdrew the peace treaty she had mentioned earlier. Immediate cessation of all hostilities, withdrawal of all hegemony forces from Terran space, reparations for civilian casualties and destroyed colonies. In exchange, the Terran Coalition offers technology-sharing agreements, mutual defense pacts, and integration into our industrial base. And if we refuse? Premier Zalthus asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Kane answered before Ambassador Chen could speak. Then this war ends in a very different way. 537 human operatives begin what we call a decapitation campaign. Every hegemony leader, every military commander, every strategic installation becomes a target for individual assassination missions. He paused, allowing the words to sink in before continuing. Your fleets will find themselves without commanders. Your governments will lose their leadership. Your military installations will suffer catastrophic equipment failures, all carried out by individuals you'll never see coming until it's too late. The human bodyguard's tone remained conversational, as if he were discussing weather patterns rather than the systematic destruction of an interstellar empire. The survivors will face a choice: sue for peace on our terms, or watch their civilization collapse as their command structure is systematically eliminated. This is terrorism, Commander Vexcool snarled, though he made no move toward his weapons. This is warfare, Kane replied simply. Asymmetric warfare practiced by a species fighting for its survival against an enemy that outmatches it in every conventional category. You chose to make this a war of a diplomat, arrived with a human bodyguard. The private consultations had lasted exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes. Ambassador Vexthul had watched the countdown timer on his personal communicator with growing anxiety as representatives from 12 different species frantically contacted their home governments, emergency sessions were called across the galaxy, and the future of interstellar civilization hung in the balance. When the delegates reconvened in the conference chamber, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The arrogance and posturing that had characterized the morning session had been replaced by the grim pragmatism of beings who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. General Korath was the first to speak, his voice carrying none of its earlier authority. The Drakmori High Command has reviewed the intelligence provided by Sergeant Kane. We have confirmed the accuracy of the battle plans and strategic assessments. He paused, his scales cycling through colors that indicated deep stress and reluctant acceptance. Our defensive experts have concluded that conventional countermeasures would be insufficient to prevent infiltration by operatives using the methods demonstrated on Drakmori Prime. The admission hung in the air like a surrender flag. If the most militaristic species in the hegemony couldn't guarantee their own security, what hope did the others have? Admiral Kexeral's tentacles moved in patterns of defeated resignation. The Tenthari Defense Council reached similar conclusions. Our naval bases, despite their oceanic environments, would not pose significant barriers to sufficiently motivated human infiltrators. One by one, each species representative offered similar assessments. The Catherian Republic's crystal cities could be reached through their mineral processing systems. The Vorthan Collective's underground complexes had ventilation networks large enough for human infiltration. The Zelith Syndicate's space stations relied on automated systems that could be turned against their operators. Each revelation drove home the same terrifying truth. Their technological superiority meant nothing against an enemy willing to abandon conventional warfare entirely. Premier Zalthus activated her personal communicator, displaying an encrypted message from her homeworld. The Catherian High Council has authorized me to sign any peace agreement that prevents the deployment of human assassination teams. Our civilization has survived for 8 millennia by avoiding conflicts we cannot win. Wise leadership, Ambassador Chen observed without irony. The Terran Coalition has always preferred diplomatic solutions to military ones. Then why? Demanded Commander Vex Cool, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. Did you not lead with this demonstration of capability? Why allow this war to continue for 3 years? Sergeant Kane answered before Ambassador Chen could speak. Because 3 years ago, we couldn't do what I did yesterday. The humans who volunteered for Operation Longshot had to be forged by this war. They had to lose everything that mattered to them before they became capable of the absolute dedication required for these missions. His pale eyes swept the chamber, meeting each delegate's gaze in turn. You created us. Commander, every civilian target you destroyed, every colony you burned, every research station you obliterated, you were creating human operatives willing to die to stop you. We are your war's children, and we are exactly what you made us to be. The psychological impact of this revelation was visible across multiple species. They had not simply been fighting a war, they had been creating their own destroyers with every atrocity committed. The irony, Ambassador Chen added quietly, is that if the hegemony had approached humanity with offers of alliance rather than demands for submission, none of this would have been necessary. We would have gladly shared our industrial capacity and innovation in exchange for technological advancement and galactic citizenship. Instead, Kane continued, you taught us that the galaxy operates on the principle of survival of the fittest. You forced us to evolve or die. Congratulations! You succeeded beyond your wildest expectations. Ambassador Vex Thul found himself in the surreal position of mediating the galaxy's swiftest transition from war to peace. If I understand correctly, the Terran Coalition is still willing to offer the same terms that would have been available 3 years ago? More generous, actually, Ambassador Chen replied, consulting her datapad. Our industrial capacity has increased dramatically during the war. We can offer technological partnerships that would benefit every species in the hegemony, defensive technologies that would make future conflicts unnecessary, medical advances that could extend lifespans across multiple species. She gestured toward Kane, who remained as motionless as a statue behind her chair. We can also offer training in the specialized techniques that made Sergeant Kane's mission possible, shared knowledge that would give every hegemony species the same capabilities we've developed. The offer was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than threatening continued assassination campaigns, the humans were offering to teach their enemies how to defend against such tactics, while simultaneously making clear that resistance would be futile. You would share these infiltration methods with former enemies? General Korath asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Former enemies, Kane emphasized. Once this treaty is signed, the war ends completely. No grudges, no revenge, no continued hostilities. We become allies working toward mutual prosperity and security. But the knowledge of what we're capable of remains, Ambassador Chen added with diplomatic precision. Should anyone choose to resume hostilities against humanity or our allies, they would do so knowing exactly what the consequences would be. The threat was implicit, but crystal clear. Peace would be maintained not through mutual trust, but through mutual assured destruction delivered on a personal level. Premier Zaltha spoke for most of the delegates when she said, "The Catherian Republic finds these terms acceptable. More than acceptable, in fact." The treaty signing that followed was unlike any in galactic history. Instead of the usual ceremonial grandeur, it was conducted with the urgent efficiency of beings who understood they were choosing between civilization and annihilation. Each species representative signed in turn, their various writing implements scratching across the document that would end the most devastating war in galactic history. As they signed, many cast nervous glances toward Sergeant Kane, whose presence served as a constant reminder of what human determination could accomplish. When the final signature was complete, Ambassador Chen stood and extended her hand toward Ambassador Vexathul in the traditional human gesture of greeting. To new beginnings and lasting peace. As hands, tentacles, claws, and crystalline appendages shook in unprecedented displays of interspecies cooperation, no one missed the significance of the moment. A war that had raged for 3 years had ended not with a massive fleet action or negotiated compromise, but with the simple demonstration of what one motivated human could accomplish. "There is one final matter," General Korath said as the formal ceremonies concluded. "The operatives you mentioned, the 537 volunteers. When will they be recalled?" Kane checked his chronometer with the same precision he applied to everything else. "They were never deployed, General. Operation Longshot was a psychological operation from the beginning. The volunteers are real, the training was real, but the actual assassination missions were never authorized." The silence that followed was profound as the implications sank in. The entire threat had been a carefully constructed bluff backed by a single devastating demonstration of capability. "You're saying," Admiral Kexrel said slowly, "that we surrendered to a force that was never actually deployed?" "You surrendered to the certainty that such a force could be deployed," Ambassador Chen corrected. Sergeant Kane proved the concept was viable. The volunteers proved we had the personnel willing to execute it. The intelligence he gathered proved we had the capability to target any installation in hegemony space. Whether we actually intended to deploy those operatives was irrelevant. The threat was real enough to change the strategic calculation. Kane's expression never changed as he delivered the final revelation. The beauty of asymmetric warfare isn't in the execution, it's in the threat. Once your enemies know what you're capable of, actually doing it becomes unnecessary. They'll defeat themselves trying to guard against something they can't defend against. As the delegates prepared to depart and carry news of the peace treaty to their respective homeworlds, Ambassador Vexathul reflected on the unprecedented nature of what had just occurred. In the space of 6 hours, the galaxy's most devastating conflict had ended not through military victory or diplomatic compromise, but through the simple demonstration that humanity had evolved beyond conventional warfare entirely. The war was over. Peace had been achieved, and every species in the galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about their newest allies. Humans were capable of absolutely anything when the survival of their species was at stake. As the Terran diplomatic vessel prepared to depart Zephyria Prime, Sergeant Kane stood at the observation deck watching the alien sunset paint the crystalline spires in shades of gold and crimson. Ambassador Chen joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the ship's supplies. "Do you think they'll honor the treaty?" she asked, handing him one of the cups. Kane sipped the coffee thoughtfully before answering. "They'll honor it. Fear is a powerful motivator, but enlightened self-interest is even better. We've shown them that cooperation is more profitable than conflict. And if they don't?" His pale eyes reflected the alien sunset as he smiled for the first time since the mission began. "Then 537 of my colleagues will be very disappointed that they missed their chance to make history." Behind them, the diplomatic vessel lifted away from Zephyria Prime, carrying news of peace to a galaxy that had forgotten such a thing was possible. And in the cargo bay, carefully secured and monitored, were the complete technical specifications for the infiltration techniques that had made it all possible, humanity's gift to their former enemies and new allies. The galaxy would never be the same. Humans had arrived not as conquerors or supplicants, but as partners who had proven themselves worthy of respect through the simple demonstration of what they were willing to sacrifice for those they loved. The war was over, the peace had begun, and somewhere in the depths of space, Ambassador Chen smiled as she realized that humanity's greatest victory hadn't been military at all. It had been teaching the galaxy that some species were simply too dangerous to fight and too valuable to lose. Ermination. We're simply accepting your terms and applying them more efficiently than you anticipated. Ambassador Chen placed the treaty document on the table with careful precision. The choice is yours, honored delegates. Peace today, with dignity and mutual benefit for all parties. Or war to the knife, with the understanding that humans have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The silence stretched uncomfortably as each delegate contemplated the implications. They had come to these negotiations expecting to dictate terms to a beaten enemy. Instead, they found themselves staring into the abyss of their own potential destruction. It was Ambassador Vex Thul who finally broke the deadlock. "I believe," he said carefully, "that these terms warrant very serious consideration. Perhaps we should adjourn briefly to allow for private consultations with our respective governments." "Of course," Ambassador Chen agreed graciously. "But I should mention that our operatives are scheduled to begin their final infiltrations in approximately 6 hours. Any decisions should be made within that time frame." As the delegates began filing out of the chamber, each lost in their own thoughts about impossible choices and unacceptable alternatives, none of them noticed Sergeant Kane's slight smile. The plan was proceeding exactly as intended, to reveal a simple paper document. The Terran Coalition is prepared to offer generous terms for immediate cessation of hostilities, reparations for civilian casualties, mutual non-aggression pacts, and shared technology agreements that would benefit all parties. "And if we refuse?" General Korath asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Kane's pale eyes met his directly. "Then this war ends in a very different way. And trust me, General, you really don't want to see how creative 50,000 highly motivated human special operators can be when they put their minds to it." The silence stretched until Ambassador Vex Thul cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should examine these generous terms more closely, in the interest of preventing further escalation." As the delegates began reviewing the peace agreement with newfound urgency, none of them noticed the slight smile that crossed Ambassador Chen's face. The plan had worked exactly as intended. Sometimes, she reflected, the best diplomacy required showing your opponents exactly what they stood to lose.